time you talk, I'm like, oh, more ideas. I also really like the idea of answering your own question before answering the question of someone else. It's that whole like, put on your oxygen mask first before helping others, figure out how to use your data as your own patient group before helping others. That's a great idea. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to be here. Hold on, I should tell you, there I am. My name's Meg Dorr. You can @ me on the Twitter if you use the Twitter. Disclosures are all in different size fonts, but I'm a co-inventor of something at the Cleveland Clinic. I do a lot of volunteer work. I am a genetic counselor, so I volunteer for the National Society of Genetic Counselors and the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. And my presentation is drawn from a number of sources, including work that I've done, John's done, our colleagues at SAGE have done, including Sarah Moore, one of our delightful colleagues there. So just a little bit of background about SAGE. SAGE is a nonprofit organization, as John was saying, where we're focused on this open and collaborative biomedical research model. And so you can understand that as a genetic counselor, this speaks to me, right? Because I want people to work together, and I want advances to be made, and I want to do it in a community-based way. And that's why it makes sense for us to be talking with you today, because you also want that. You also want community-based science and biomedical advancement. So I'm going to tell you a little story about my neighborhood, and then I'm going to talk to you about ethical recruitment, informed consent, and IRBs. And if at any point I lose you, either from sleep or because you have a question, you should just feel free to interrupt me. I was a middle school science teacher for 10 years, so there is nothing you can do short of vomiting on me that will disturb my flow today. All right, so this is my neighborhood. Well, this is the neighborhood that I most recently lived in Cleveland, Ohio. It's one of the oldest public integrated neighborhood associations in the city of Cleveland, which makes it one of the oldest in the nation, and it is an amazing, bucolic place. Children play in the streets. This is the water balloon fight that ends our 4th of July celebration. I mean, like flags, hot dogs, you name it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And you can see our kids look good, right? Healthy, active, having fun. But Cleveland is in the Midwest, and the Midwest is like America, only a little rounder. And obesity is really a problem in my neighborhood, like probably in your neighborhood too. And it's a problem because food, I mean, Mrs. Mitchell brings a pound cake, like pound cake for 100,000 people to this gathering every year, and you are not going to say no to her pound cake, because food is community and food is culture, right? So my friend Meredith, whose dog Jackson is on the left there, my friend Meredith is one of those super exerciser girls. She had, the tracking watch long before anybody had the tracking watch. And she kept telling us about tracking her exercise and how amazing it was and how it would really change our lives, blah, 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 blah. And we're like, sure, Mare. And so for Christmas, her spouse got her a new fancy exercise watch. And so she had this old exercise thing. And she gave it to our friend Dan. Moxie is his dog, in her tutu for 4th of July. And she gave her little fitness tracker to Dan. And Dan started using the fitness tracker. Now, Dan has diabetes, but he was, in competition with Meredith over the number of steps. It gets a little cutthroat in the neighborhood. Competition comes in many forms. I'm not going to say that one person was maybe from The Ohio State University and another person from Michigan. I'm just throwing out that there may be internal rivalries that exist within my neighborhood, right? So there's this step competition going on, right? So Dan is upping and upping his steps. He can see the count. He can see Meredith's count. He knows what's going on. He then goes to his doctor to get his diabetes checked out. He's lost 20 pounds. His blood sugar is amazing. He's never stepped on a scale, doesn't own one. It's too depressing, he says. But after 6 months of stepping every day, suddenly he's in this whole new category of health. which is amazing, right? As a clinician, I'm like, wow, magic. Then other people in the neighborhood started getting in on it. So Cujo, at the top, is Annie's cat. Annie had double knee replacement surgery and was sort of slow to start moving, but when she heard about the competition with the steps, she got in on it. Coco, on the bottom left, is Danielle's dog. Danielle had 2 active sons in a row, and as we all know who have small children, what that can do to a person's body. Sometimes it just takes a little recovery time, right? So she started stepping. And then Bruna is Jeff and Maura's dog. Bruna, Jeff lost a family member to gun violence and was really depressed, and had sort of, kind of lost a lot of motivation. They got Bruna, he started walking, he got in on the step competition. So now we have sorority sisters, the AKAs and the Deltas are involved. Like, there's a lot going on here, lots of competition with the steps. And everybody is losing weight and everybody is getting healthier. And it's amazing, right? It's a contagion of health. And as a scientist, as a researcher, I want that data. I want to understand what's going on. Like, what is it about this competition that's helping people to do what we want them to do? And so when we ask people about their personal health data, PHD means personal health data here. I can understand how it would be a confusing acronym. This is data from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. When we ask people about who would you share your personal health data with, they do say that they would share it with health professionals. They'll share it with friends before they'll share it with their spouse, an interesting piece of data in and of itself. And then they'll share it with people like me. When asked directly if they would share their data with researchers, they say yes, absolutely. And you all are coming probably from rare disease communities where people are like begging you to take their data. Like, anything, please just take the data. But one of the key things from this research that's interesting to me is that people want some anonymity. And that goes back to those pictures of the dogs and Cujo, the cat who is deadly. My neighbors want to help me science, but they don't want to be in a presentation that's being broadcast all over the world. It's okay for Jackson and Cujo and Bruno and Coco and Moxie, but they don't want to be the people involved, because this kind of stuff happens. You guys remember when Mark Zuckerberg spent some time here in Washington, D.C., right? Privacy is a real issue for people, and I think it's actually becoming a bigger and bigger issue for people as we are starting to recognize all of the different ways in which our data is being used for us and against us. And to John's earlier point about algorithms and the way algorithms can be biased by the bias that's implicit in the data that's collected, we are understanding somewhat that our loss of privacy is a form of weaponization of data against us. And so this puts us in a tricky place. We want to help science, we want to help researchers, we want to do it in a way that is still protecting and respectful of our own boundaries. So how do you do this? How do you create this magical, bucolic community of trust, right? You need a steward. The job of the data steward is to create this community of trust. That's the responsibility of the steward. That's like your job as the data steward, is to create a community of trust. And so long as you remember that that's your job, the creating of the community of trust, then everything else will come along with it. Because trust as a foundation really facilitates all sorts of discovery. So how do you create a community of trust? I would say that there are 3 things you need to do. You need to be deliberate, you need to be honest, and you need to be transparent. So let's walk through how being deliberate, honest, and transparent can happen in a data collection exercise or in a research study. You can be deliberate in your recruitment. So ethical recruitment for a study or ethical recruitment for a database has to be deliberate. It doesn't just happen by accident. Bad things people did in the past, researchers did in the past, make people not want to participate in research. Also, researchers often don't even ask diverse people to be part of their database. And then researchers themselves are also subject to bias, either implicit bias or explicit bias. Oh, they're so difficult to get in touch with. Oh, that would be too difficult to measure. Oh, well, if they want to be part of this, they'll reach out to us. All of these are strategies that lead to non-representative samples, and non-representative samples are one of the problems that we have in medicine today. Recently, I was looking at my fitness watch data, because now I have one too. Even though I'm a qualitative researcher, even though I'm a researcher who reads words rather than looks at numbers, I now have this number device because of Dan and Coco and everybody back in my neighborhood. And I was looking at my data, and I was looking at my heart rate data for the past year, and I was, kind of trying to figure out, am I like being a vigorous exerciser? And I started looking at the heart rate stuff, and I started digging into the maximum heart rate calculations, and I found out the standard maximum heart rate calculation, the 220 minus your age, plus your resting heart rates involved in it, is based only on men. Literally no women, none at all, no women involved in the development of that algorithm, none. 51% of the population not represented. Needless to say, the 220 minus your age calculation thing, it doesn't work for most women. Oh, shock. Women's soccer team, like, hello. Yeah. Northwestern was like, oh, we should study women. So they actually created a formula for women that's different, 208. 208 minus your age. Anyway, it turns out I am an extremely vigorous exerciser as a woman. If you judge me as a man, maybe not, but I'm not a guy, right? So making sure that you have representative data sets is really important to the validity of the findings that you get. And it starts with ethical recruitment, and ethical recruitment is deliberate. It doesn't just happen by accident. So you all are in a special place because rare disease communities have power that other communities don't. Because there's an urgency, and there's also a sisterhood or a brotherhood or a community already made for you. You are all fighting this common enemy, or you are all adapting around this common thing in your lives. But with that power comes this responsibility. Have you reached all of the corners of your community, or have you only found the people who are the easiest to find? And how are you going to reach out and find all of the corners of your community to make sure that your recruitment is deliberate and is inclusive? Have you guys ever seen this program, Nailed It? This is like basically my story, right? Ideal cake, real cake, all right? So this is a lesson for us, because recruitment is like this. We're like, I am going to reach everyone, and I'm going to find out who all these people are, and then you're like, oh, kind of. Right, so we often use the internet as a tool. The internet has a lot of failings as a tool for reaching out to people. Just want to highlight to you that people who have low income, people who are not white, people who have lower education levels, people who are in rural areas, are not necessarily internet connected. And this is really important. Digital is so sexy, and it's easy to get people to give you money to do things on phones. But it is more important to get your sample, to get your recruitment to be representative than it is to just stick with fancy, easy things like the internet. So if you use the internet, you're not going to reach everybody. You're really not. And this is just in the United States. If you're trying to reach people internationally, there are some nations where you might be able to reach a little bit more people using the internet, and a lot of places where you're going to reach a lot fewer people. So what do you do about this? You look outside the internet. You need to use the people that you know in your network to help you find the corners of your community. Sorry that the printing is so small here. You need to go to places where people who are low income or people who have low education or people who are not white are. So federally qualified health centers is where people who are very low income go and get health care. Or community groups or libraries. These are places where you might be able to connect with a lot of people that you won't be able to connect with on the internet. You also still need to use the telephone. Few of you are as millennial as some of the people that I work with, but I actually had to teach one of my colleagues how to use a telephone that was plugged into a wall. Like she had never dialed 9 to get an outside line. I kid you not, I had to do with Sarah Moore. And it's incredible, yeah. And now she uses the phone all the time. It's amazing, it's amazing. You know, teach once and watch them grow. You also should go in person, because if you're trying to build a community of trust, going in person and demonstrating that you're part of that community, bringing yourself to a meeting is really an easy way of showing that you're really invested, that you're trustworthy. It's also interesting to see what the All of Us research program is doing. So the All of Us research program, interestingly, is really an electronically based study trying to enroll 1 million or more people living in the United States over 10 years, doing all sorts of great stuff. But they're going in person. They're leveraging community groups. And so this is my friend Kobe on the left. And he's at the Abyssinia Baptist Church, just outside of the Abyssinia Baptist Church in New York City. And he went in person and met people after church to try to get them interested and involved and engaged in this research study. So it's not that people in that community are not using the internet necessarily. It's that by going in person, he was helping to connect people by his person, by his face, by his name, to this idea, this big ephemeral idea of research. It's always tricky to talk about coercion, but it's really important for us to talk about it together. Rare disease communities can be a place where coercion can be a real challenge when you think about ethical recruitment, because things can feel so desperate, and there are so few of you in your group. But people make different choices for different reasons, and just because a person makes a different choice than you would, it does not mean that they are a bad person. Maybe a lesson for our nation right now. There are reasons that people engage in research. There are reasons that people don't. One of the ways, though, to make your research endeavor or your registry or your biobank that you're developing more inviting is to create levels of participation, to allow people to put their toes in the water before they have to jump all the way in. And so if there's anything that I would recommend to you is to consider creating tiers of involvement to allow people to get comfortable. Again, as part of building this trustworthy community, allow people to step in and try it. Is it gonna be too much time for them? Are the questions gonna be too invasive? Is the data types, are they too close to home? Is it gonna make them feel bad to collect this data and watch the person that they love or themselves decline? Allow people to stick their toes into the water before they jump all the way in. Also plan for space and time for decision making. When you're recruiting people, oftentimes you're recruiting at your national gathering, your single national gathering, and you're trying to get everybody enrolled. Give people the time and space to really think about whether they want to be involved so that they have time to ask questions so that they really feel comfortable when they're joining. Another uncomfortable topic, money. Research participation, we always talk about, oh, well, it's free. All you have to do is give us your data. But there can be collateral damage from participation in research. Insurance discrimination is just one of those. The Kidney Precision Medicine Program, which is an NIH program, they had a patient group that were advising the development of their protocol, and the patient group was like, there's kidney biopsy. Kidney biopsy can lead to long-term disability and or death, and so you need to have an insurance policy that covers that, so that if somebody who participates in the research has long-term care needs, that there's an insurance policy that would cover them. And it actually turned out, although it was difficult for them to get it, it's not expensive for them to have this insurance policy. So they had to really sort of explain, well, it's a very rare occurrence to the insurance company, but the insurance company was like, okay, we'll insure against that. So think about the way that money might impact your study, and think about its connection to the recruitment of the people that you're getting. Because if you're really trying to reach every corner of your community, money is going to be one of the things that's important. And money might be in the form of time. If you're asking people for a lot of their time, people sometimes, that's competing with the paid work that they need to do to keep their family afloat. Ethical recruitment is deliberate. All right. We good with ethical recruitment? Yes, good. All right, informed consent, honest. Informed consent needs to be an honest process. You need to be, first, honest with yourself. It all begins with you. It all begins with the self. What are you doing, and why are you doing it? What are the real risks, and what are the risks that you actually have no real idea about yet? The unknown unknowns. And what are the benefits? And you need to be honest with yourself about this. What are the realistic benefits of your research? And then what are your blue sky, oh, this would be so great. You need to have those two things separate and clear in your mind. So you can say, realistically, this is what we're hoping for. If everything went perfectly, this is where we hoped we would be. You need to also be honest with participants. You need to think about what they would want to know. And there's actually, a whole code of federal regulations that tell you what you have to tell people, but you have some flexibility in what you emphasize to people. So what might they overlook as they're considering joining your study or your research database? And then you need to think about how are they going to actually learn. And when I'm saying that, literally, how are they going to learn, read, understand, comprehend about your study? Because are anybody's children like these? I totally look like that every morning, and my toddler is so happy, and we're all looking, and there's no grabbing, there's no snot on anybody's face. Yeah, think about people's real lived lives. This is research that we did with federally qualified health centers as part of the All of Us research program, and it's way too tiny for you to see all of the questions, but these were the questions that people had about research. And these were people who had a 4th grade reading ability or lower, many of whom could not read at all. They wanted to know, how do you join it? How does it work? How does this research thing work? Why is this part of the research? Why are you even collecting this stuff? What are you not telling me? And that is a really, really telling theme. If people thinking about joining research, one of their questions is, what are you not telling me? You feel like a used car salesman, and it's maybe because people who have tried to get them to do research before have been used car salesmen. I mean, not to put used car salesmen down, but this idea of this trope of hiding things from people and not being transparent with them, not being honest. They had privacy concerns, and they wanted to know about the results. These are all the same things that people who have higher reading abilities ask about as well, but maybe they're not as explicit. The what are you not telling me, I think, is something for us to really internalize and think about. There are some challenges, though. Reading is really difficult for most people. 1 in 5 Americans reads at the 5th grade reading level or below. Suddenly, you have removed 20% of people from your study if you write it at the 8th grade reading level. 20% of people won't be able to understand. 1 in 3 Americans, when they're reading health-related stuff, is at the basic or below basic level, meaning they would really struggle with an informed consent document. Stress, anxiety, pain, and depression all lower a person's ability to read. So although I may have all sorts of fancy letters after my name, I can tell you that when I chopped off the end of my finger, I couldn't read anything. I couldn't understand anything because I was like bleeding like Monty Python style. Like, it was terrifying, right? When we're in pain, or worse, when the person that we love the most is in pain, it makes it very, very difficult for us to understand, to read and understand a document. Also, even if you can read, you don't. Most people don't read terms of service, like 98%, 99% of people. This was an interesting study where buried in the terms of service to get Wi-Fi, they said you had to give up your firstborn child. And 99.8% of people said, sure, yeah, absolutely, I agree, because we don't read. So here's some advice for you about how to make it better, right? If people can't read and people don't read, so what do we do? Have you guys ever seen the Pampers Pooh Face video? You should bookmark it. It's so adorable. It's so wonderful. This is a picture from the Pooh Face video. First, in your informed consent, you need to use words that people understand. So my friend Michael's dad is a surgeon. He retired. He volunteered then at a public clinic. He goes into the public clinic and he's talking to people, and he comes home from his first day of volunteering at this public clinic, and he says to my friend, so I'm really concerned about the digestive health of the people that I'm caring for. And Michael was like, Dad, why are you so worried about that? He was like, I asked everyone today if they had had a bowel movement, and everyone said no. Mike was like, well, did you ask them if they pooed? And he was like, well, why would I use that word? And Mike was like, because people understand it. So using words that people understand is really critical. Needless to say, the next time he volunteered at the public clinic, it turned out everybody did poo. You know? It's about using words that people understand. If you have to use complicated words, explain them. Explain them carefully and explain them clearly. You should also shorten your informed consent document, like mercilessly distill it down to the most essential things. You need to structure the text to slow people down, to give them hints about what you're talking about. You need to organize the information, and you can add videos and icons and pictures to help you do this. We have all of this information about informed consent put together in a compendium called The Elements of Informed Consent. Version 2 was released today. It's my birthday gift to you. Thank you. It's free. You can use it. You can use it anytime you'd like to. If you just Google Sage Bionetworks Elements of Informed Consent, you'll find it. There's also a link in your workbooks, but I'm not sure if that link is exactly the same link. But go there, because I break down even further what this really looks like in reality. Back to this idea of words. We did a study, again, this is the work that we did with the federally qualified health centers that are part of the All of Us research program, talking with people who have a 4th grade reading ability or below. And here are the words that they were not familiar with, kind of familiar with, and very comfortable with. I can say that CSI has done a great job with DNA. I really appreciate the work that they've done as a science education program. Because people really do understand what DNA is. It's passed from parents to kids. It can tell you who your kids' parents are. It can tell who you are and be used to find you in a crime. They also understand about doctors and family history and medicine. But things that they're not familiar with are words that we throw around in informed consents all of the time. Database, biobank, withdraw. Now, withdraw, that's one of your fundamental rights in joining a study. If people don't understand what that word is, they're missing one of the key things that makes them able to participate, right? Here's an example of some structured text. This is a privacy policy that we helped edit for the Digital Medicine Society. You can just see right here, this privacy policy tells you about, there are all of the topics. A person can go right there and find out. There's main headers, there's subheaders. They can go to the thing that interests them the most. We also sequestered, I think that this is an important thing, sequestering of detail. So you see down there where it says technical details about logging practices, external cookies, do not track beacon. All of that information is still part of this website, it's still available to people, but we have sequestered it in an area so that people who are interested can learn more about the technical detail, but you don't have to master the technical detail to understand what information is being collected about you and how it's going to be used. On a screen, here's an example of how it can look. So this is the work that John was alluding to, he spent years and years developing, and that we've now used in a million different ways. Using an icon to slow people down, to give them an idea of what's going on. Shortening the text, having a headline and a subheadline. Keeping it really, really concise. And then you can see that learn more that's in red underneath. Again, that's sequestering of detail. So allowing that detail to exist, but not requiring it as part of the main flow. We use that design with the All of Us research program consent. So this is work that I helped coordinate. You can see, again, icons, headlines, subheadlines. In the All of Us e-consent, we actually also include videos, because videos have narration, which helps people understand, and they also doesn't require you to read. You can just listen. They're written at the 5th grade reading level. They have linear navigation. And there's get help buttons throughout. So let's look. This is also, they also have long forms, so if you're like electronic, we're never going to get there, we're always going to have a paper consent form, don't worry, there is work you still can do to improve your written consent form. White space, no sections in all caps. All caps is yelling. Nobody needs that. It doesn't make you less liable or more liable if you do or don't. Don't let a lawyer try to convince you of this. So does it work? The colors didn't come out right, but blue means they got the right answer. So what's the purpose of All of Us? To give medical advice and treatment, or to help scientists make discovery about health? And then this is broken down by self-reported education attainment. So people with a lower than 5th grade educational attainment, still 90% of them got this question correct. Overall, more than 95% of people could answer this question correctly. Understanding the purpose of a study, less than half of people who sign up for research studies understand what the purpose is. And less than 1 in 10 get that it's not medical treatment. So therapeutic misconception is very, very common in research studies. And so getting people to understand what the core purpose of your research is, and that it's not a substitute or an example of medical treatment, is really, really important. So if you use words that people understand and you take the time to teach them, then they do comprehend, even if they don't have a lot of raw educational skill coming into the informed consent process. And this is a way of making your consent process honest, because you can look at these data and understand if you're doing a good job or not. A quiz, oh my gosh. So let me talk for a moment about quizzes. There's a lot of ways that you can use quizzes in your consent process, and I would encourage you to do that. It's a form of teach back. So teach back is a very common method that we use in health education with your doctor might say to you, could you tell me back in your own words what it is I was just trying to explain to you, or could you tell me how you're going to use this medicine? That's an example of teach back. A quiz is just a written form of teach back, or it can be, you can use a recorded quiz and remind people of the correct answers. There's two approaches, formative evaluation and summative evaluation. Formative evaluations are really to help people reflect on their own understanding. And because there's no objective standard for the amount of comprehension that a person has to have, an autonomous adult needs to have in order to join a research study, formative evaluations are usually the most appropriate ones to use, right? It reinforces these key concepts. It creates a pause within the informed consent process for people to reflect. It encourages people to ask questions, but it doesn't stop them from joining, because they're adults and they should be able to choose what it is that they want to do, right? Summative evaluations are gates. You only can get through them if you get the right answer, or you get enough of the right answers. And there's a number of places where this is the appropriate approach. So in the All of Us research program, we use a formative approach. In the Parkinson's disease study, the Empower study that John was talking about, we use a summative approach because cognitive decline is one of the features of Parkinson's disease, and we want to make sure that the people who are joining the study are cognitively intact enough to understand and be able to answer correctly, for example, questions about whether they can withdraw, whether they can quit the study at any time, or what the purpose of the study is. Does this make sense? We're good? Okay. All right. Ethical recruitment is deliberate. Informed consent is honest. Yes?
You told me I could interrupt you.
Yes.
Taking you up on it.
Wonderful.
My name is Kate. I work at San Antonio for Patient Advocacy, and I actually just downloaded your papers and sent them over to our clinical trials.
Oh.
So thank you.
Thanks.
For letting us under there.
Yay, free.
Curious if you can comment a bit on how within lowering or bringing down sort of the scientific level of discourse within papers and ICS needs to be balanced. I know you want me to speak into a mic if you're recording it.
I can repeat your question.
Yeah, you get balance with sort of raising health literacy. So, advocacy, we're always thinking about this. Like, do you just lower, or do you lower and then try to raise at the same time?
Right.
Sort of
Right.
those two things balance.
Right. So the question that Kate was asking is about creating accessible materials for informed consent and balancing the accessibility of the informed consent materials with our ethical obligation to raise the level of understanding of all people of the scientific endeavor. So I think that there are many places where education is appropriate. The informed consent process, though, is a decision-making exercise. And we are not there to teach. We are there for people to learn, right? To understand what's going on. And so we need to make our informed consent processes as understandable as humanly possible. We need to use words that people understand. We need to be clear. We need to be concrete. We need to use illustrations that are not terrifying, but actually help people understand what's going on. We need to give time for questions. It just needs to be its own thing. Additionally, surrounding the informed consent process, there can be links to educational videos. There can be more information that learn more. That sequestration of detail is a great place for education, but it should not be essential. Education, being educated, should not be essential to your decision-making process. So I, for example, have the ability to marry anyone, right? I don't have to go through an educational process. My religious home may offer me an educational process about the marriage endeavor, which may make the success of my marriage better or worse. But it's not a requirement for me to enter into that contract. Likewise, with research, people can sign an informed consent document if they're getting what's being offered to them, and they can also engage in education if they'd like to, and it may actually help them participate more or understand better, but it shouldn't be essential. That's my personal strong opinion. which I just have stated to you as if it were fact, but it's just an opinion. Other questions? No worries. Thanks, Kate. All right. So, ethical recruitment is deliberate. Informed consent is honest. Let's talk about transparency and the IRB. Does everybody know what IRB stands for? Yeah, just think Ethics Review Board, ethical body, right? IRBs are founded to protect the rights of participants. They are there to advocate for the rights of participants of research. They have two jobs. Is the proposed research ethically acceptable? Not whether it's the best, it's just, is it ethically acceptable? And does it comply with the research regulations that govern the practice of human subjects research? IRBs are composed of actual human beings from diverse backgrounds who may or may not understand a lot about the thing that you are proposing. And IRB approval is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Some people say to me, but the IRB said it was okay. Like, that's not a standard for you. That's not, is it helping you build your community of trust? That's your standard. The IRB is just there to act as an external advisor about whether you're meeting the research regulations and you're not doing anything that's ethically indefensible. In order to work with an ethics review board, and you will if you want to propose a study or propose developing a database of any kind, you need to do your prep work. You need to detail your plans, and by detail, like, you need to really think about them. You need to be forthright and clear, and you have to remember that you are the person who is ultimately responsible, not the IRB, for the research that you're conducting. It pays to do your homework. IRB submissions can be costly and time-consuming. So really take time to think through all aspects of your study. Are there any unknown unknowns? This is a really important point. The unknowns. John was sharing with me recently, who was it, Luca? One of our collaborators found that 6 days of walking data, pedometry data, is enough to identify you as an individual person out of 100 million people. Don't tweet it. No papers on it.
Yeah.
But that's an example of an unknown, that your walking pattern or that your tapping pattern or the way you interact with your phone or the way that you do something is so identifiable to you that we could pick you out of a crowd. And so as we go into all of these different areas of collecting data, we're going to find unknown unknowns. We don't think we can tell things about people. Certainly we wouldn't collect the data if we did. But slowly, over time, we're learning more about the richness of digital data. And so acknowledging that there are some things that you don't know and nobody knows right now, like how identifiable is this data going to be? Well, we're going to protect it. Here's what we know now. Here's our plan for assessing periodically about the identifiability of this data set as we add more to it or as it gets used by more people. Also think carefully about the distribution of benefit. The distribution of benefit is really important. Are you going to give back? What are you going to give back? Results and data are two very separate things. You might be able to give back data, but you might not be able to give back results. Results are interpreted data. And when you start giving back results, then you start getting in with the FDA, who regulates the return of results. And you also need to have a clear data governance plan when you go to your IRB, so transparency about your data governance plan. There are also things that you need to understand so you can help the IRB understand them. What data are you really collecting? If you're using any sort of electronic data stream, you really need to understand all of the nitty-gritty about what kind of data it is that you're collecting. And you also need to understand end user license agreements, privacy policies and terms of service. These are really tricky to understand because they are not written to inform people. They're CYA agreements, and so, which stands for cover your backside. And so really understanding, if you're using a third-party vendor, what are the terms and conditions under which you're using that third-party vendor? What are they going to take from you? What are you going to get from them? And being transparent with the IRB about that. A little bit about more data than you want. This is a very old slide about our phones and how much data they collect. Basically, our phones collect gazillions and gazillions of bits of data. And they collect data that we wouldn't collect about people if we were doing the same thing in a clinic. So for example, if you have somebody do a walking task and you use a GPS to measure the distance that they walk, you actually know where they have walked. And they might be doing their walking task on their way to visit their mistress, which would be awkward. Or on their way in Seattle to the dispensary, or to the bar, or to the McDonald's. And these are pieces of information that you don't want and that you would never get if you were collecting these data in a clinical environment. Terms of service and privacy policies, they're written in confusing ways. IRBs are just catching on that these are important, so your IRB might not even ask you for this documentation, but believe me when I say it is really, really critical. Terms of service and privacy policy can undermine the promises that you make to people in the informed consent process. And so you need to read these documents and understand them completely. If you're using a third-party system or an electronic system or a device of any kind, you need to understand what the privacy policy and terms of use say so that you can be transparent with the IRB and so you can be honest as part of your informed consent process. Finally, data governance. Data stewards have an ethical obligation, I would argue, to release data to the broadest community of solvers while simultaneously ensuring that the data is not misused, which is an incredible tension. You want as many smart people as humanly possible to use the data, and you also want to keep it as private as possible. Diametrically opposed, right? So consider how you use transactional cost, exposure, and openness to level this playing field. So if you're asking for a certain amount of potential exposure from participants, ask for some level of exposure from researchers. Ask them to have a data use statement that they publicly post. Ask them to list their institutional affiliation. Put them out in the public too, to help level off this playing field. Also think carefully when you're talking to your IRB about how you're defining researcher. At Sage Bionetworks, we've done challenges where we release data and we offer a prize and people come and solve on it. And some of our solvers have been completely non-traditional people. People not from the United States, people not with a data science background. It's amazing when you use the collective human mind how much more quickly we can accelerate research. And so when you define researcher, define it in a way that's consistent with what you're telling your participants, and also define it clearly for your IRB so that they understand what it is you're actually going to be doing. So, data stewards create communities of trust. They create communities of trust by being deliberate, by being honest, and by being transparent. I work with lots of people. One of them's right here on the stage. I'm very thankful to all of them. And thank you for your time and attention.
Taking questions now from the audience here and online. We got a lot waiting for us, but do we have any in the audience right now?
Thank you. That was excellent and depressing, John. Thank you. So I'm going to add to that. Meg, your slide about IRBs that had the statue, you said why they were founded. I would argue that for many of them, not the one I use, but for many of them, their current purpose is to protect the institution. And that's where we end up with 47-page informed consents and things like that. Is there any way, I always say researchers can't fight the IRB system because it'll look like they're trying to get away with something, but maybe the patient community could push back and bring the IRB community to the current state of affairs. I've never been in an IRB, and I've never been asked to talk to an IRB, yet decisions have been made by IRBs about my health and my child's health, and often they're protecting me from things I don't need to be or care to be protected from. And when I push back, people will say, well, there was a patient representative. I'm sure there was, but not a patient representative that knows anything about my child's condition. Are there such things as IRBs that bring in the patient of interest? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Megan. So I think we're getting to a new place with informed consent and with IRBs. The All of Us research program, I think, is really starting to push the needle on that because it has representatives, participant representatives that inform it, and also because of this mandate to make sure that the materials that we've developed are understandable to the broadest swath of people living within the United States. And so when you get pushback from IRBs, it's often helpful to point to an external standard and to say, well, this group has done it. They're doing it at this large scale. And there's been lots of publicity about the All of Us informed consent, which people can use to their advantage. The Kidney Precision Medicine program actually got referred to us by their IRB because they wanted the consent to be more understandable to more people. So I consider that a great progress. When it comes to protecting you from things that you don't want to be protected from, I think that this is where entering into a dialogue of partnership with your IRB is valuable. So when Sage Bionetworks was first developing our electronic consent process, we were working with an IRB, and our first presentation of this process to them, they were like, no way, absolutely not. This is crazy, this is terrible, it's awful.
I get that.
Yeah.
A fair amount.
Yeah, exactly. But by continuing to engage them in active dialogue to say, well, here's the research about health literacy, and here's the research about the way that people engage with screens, and here's the background, the foundation, the scientific foundation that we're using to build this system. Through iterative conversation, we were able to arrive at a better place. And so rather than, and this is why I said, IRBs are made up of actual people. They're real people too. And so engaging with them in a dialogue rather than trying to find the human connection, I think is one of the ways that you can help move things forward. It's definitely not a perfect system. And I agree with you, the modern interpretation of IRBs in many places is to protect the institution that they're founded by.
And just I agree with everything Megan just said. To the extent that there's a place for innovation in this, it might be, so you have the institutional review board, which is not always the same as an independent review board.
Yeah.
So there's a community of independent review boards that, like, we use one of these, and they've had some failures in their history, right, to say the least. But it's the sort of thing that a Global Genes might be able to have a conversation with, a Quorum or, some of the other IRB networks to say, could we stand up an IRB that is more connected to this community? And some of the recent regulatory changes that are, allowing explicitly a single national IRB may be a chance for that, where if you could stand up an IRB that was more connected to this community, and then require, in working with an institution, that instead of using their IRB, that they sign a reliance agreement with your IRB. That's one of the ways that you can get through this. Yeah. And the All of Us research program has been through the forcing process of forcing these institutions to sign these kinds of reliance agreements. And they hate it.
They do.
They hate it with the fire of 1,000 suns. But it's the sort of thing where now that it's been done once, maybe they only hate it with the fire of 100 suns. right? And so I think there's an opening there, and we can have a conversation during the mentoring or elsewhere about sort of people you might talk to about.
Yeah, I think one of the most, and certainly one of the most valuable questions that I've ever asked in negotiations with an IRB is this part of a regulatory standard, or is this conventional practice? And being able to distinguish what is actually required by law from what is the traditional way that we've done things helps us get down, helps that distilling process happen, because we just need to get to the essential facts, right? We can let go of what.
I watched Megan turn someone into jelly by simply saying over and over again, if you can just show me the state law that's relevant to that. I mean, the person eventually became jelly and went away because they're like, actually, it's the reason we can't allow a digital signature on a consent form is because of institutional policy. But it took like a month of, where's the statute?
Yeah.
Very gently,
Yeah.
very nice about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I still have friends in the state of Texas. I'm not sure. We'll see.
I was thinking of a different state. That's even another one.
We have so many questions coming in.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Jen and Megan. So in a system that works against collaboration, how can we motivate not only researchers, but other advocacy organizations and pharma companies to collaborate?
You want me to jump? I mean, pay them to. I mean, I hate to be blunt, but that's the most effective. And I recognize that that's not an option for everybody, right? That not all of us research programs is a Cadillac, right? It's a ton of money, like 1.4 billion appropriated over a decade, right? So the one thing that you can do is you can follow the Cadillac programs and sort of free ride on their resources. And then the other one I think is to collaborate with the people who want to collaborate, because it's actually really hard, even if people want to collaborate, if they're not used to it. It's really hard to get them going, and so trying to force people who don't want to collaborate often kills the ability of those who do want to collaborate to get anything done. I would say that this is not a popular opinion in the movement that I'm in, but I think pharma is way better at collaborating than a lot of other industry sectors. I might not collaborate with small biotech because I think they're much more likely to proprietize things as part of their business model, but like pharma, like they're pretty good at collaborating. But the number one thing is you either have to find money to pay people to look at your data in a collaborative way and to coordinate them. It's a consulting function. Or you have to create a resource that is so essential, right, like the Human Genome Project, that everyone feels they have to use it, which is probably not doable here. Or the third way is you have to make it so easy to use your data that collaborating with you is the same thing as I collaborate with the internet when I search a Google search, right? And thinking to that level, how do I make it so easy for my data to flow in a workflow context to the people doing the work at the moment that they don't even think I'm collaborating with you. They think I'm just writing a piece of code that adds more data to my system and that automatically sends results back to the people from whom I got the data. And I think it's that last piece where I think the real opportunity is. But if you have an opportunity to work with pharma, I would work with pharma.
Okay, great, thank you. Others in the audience?
We have a couple questions over here. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. You have a follow-up to this? Okay.
I'm one pharma company. We're a gigantic French conglomerate, so I feel like I can speak for big pharma. Part of the challenge we have with data sharing, particularly as groups want to set up registries or info on data, is getting the regulators to accept the quality and validity of that data. So I think just to tag on to that, sort of the third piece of that wheel has to be a regulator or someone who will be using that data, because especially if there's a post-marketing commitment or you're trying to use it as a natural history study, we can only collaborate with you if the data you're creating will later be valuable to us.
Hi, thanks, John and Meg. This is actually one of the most influential presentations I've seen in the rare disease space, and that's just my opinion. And I say that because as a researcher, so thank you for taking us to task about the research world and how that works. I completely agree. And I kind of sit as an outlier in that space sometimes because I definitely agree. But I oftentimes am discouraged in the rare disease space when it comes to just the sheerness of the fact that we are talking about rare disease and making sure, because we're already ostracized in that category, but making sure that people that are representatives in our registries are representative of our population. And I think that's one of the main concerns, in my opinion, because, and I'll give an example, I went to a physician and she was a white female and she said to me, "Hey, Tanisha, your BMI is," I think I was probably obese. And I said to her, "That scale isn't right, and that's not the average scale that you should use for an African-American woman." And she was shocked. And she said, "Well, where do you get that from?" And I said, "That's not accurate. So if you think about the BMI scale and who participated in that, where do we get that scale from?" And for her to have the credentials that she had, she was really shocked, and she said she had never heard of it before. So, and I'm pretty sure I'm probably overweight, but my point was that the scale that you're using is not appropriate for the person that I am. And I say that because I think that oftentimes in rare disease, we need to make sure, and it's very important, and I'm not just talking about African Americans and white, I'm talking about in general, we're including people that are outside of what we typically think of as rare disease, because rare disease affects many people from different ethnic groups, different racial groups, all types of in the field, and we need to make sure we're including them now. Because if we're coming up with therapeutics and we're thinking about pharma companies, we don't want to be in a situation, I forgot the particular medication that came out, but they used a population that had no one that was outside of a white male or in that particular framework. And I'm afraid sometimes that we're doing the same thing in rare disease. Even when it comes to our speakers and things like that, we need to make sure that we're appropriate in what we're doing and we're relaying a message that is across the board from a lot of different places and not just what we traditionally see as rare disease. And when we think about rare disease income-wise, who are we not reaching? There are a lot of people that are not represented in this room just because they don't have the access to healthcare systems. So how are we reaching those individuals? And when we're talking about therapeutics, if we come up with a therapeutic right now, I'm afraid that those therapeutics are not going to be appropriate for an average person that's facing the dilemma of rare disease. So I'll give that space first, and then I'll end with an actual question, which is how, and I'm not saying this is easy, but how do you all think, I know we said be transparent, be intentional about what we're doing. How do we do that in a space with rare disease where we're already in a network of groups that are very small, and it's very hard to reach out to people outside of the common traditional people we would think of for rare disease?
So I think that there's a couple of levels of responsibility, right? Within one's rare disease of focus, you have a responsibility to, as I was saying, find the corners of your community and really reach out and leverage and educate so that you can find people. I was talking with a clinician once about not very rare, but hereditary condition. And he said, "Well, I don't have any of them in my practice." And I said, "Well, you have 5,000 people, and the incidence is 1 in 1,000 people. You have 5 of them in your practice. You just don't know who they are." And so I think one of the mandates of rare disease communities, and there are so many, and it's a lot of responsibility, is to help educate so that we find, so that we can ascertain people, so that people know what's going on with themselves. But then when you take a step up and you think about the rare disease community, thinking about all of the corners of that community, we have some rare diseases that have a lot of funding. We have some rare diseases that have a famous person associated with them that maybe rise to the top. But how do we bring other foundations on board? I think that those are both really key questions, and not necessarily questions that I can answer for the community, but something for you all to think about.
Yeah, and I would just say, the first is, of course, like I live with researchers. I love researchers. They're our people, right? But I think it's often the case that if you've not been around researchers a lot, you don't know what their life is like.
Yeah.
And in many cases, I think they're trapped in systems professionally that make it really hard for them to change. And the degree to which what we're proposing here is change is not always obvious to us because we know what we want it to be. But to them, it looks like it violates the rules of gravity. And so my argument is not sort of to beat up on researchers, but to meet them where they live and recognize the structures that they're sort of constrained by, at the same time that we build a new system that hopefully some of them can defect to over time. To your second, and I think more important point is what can we do is, I think each group in a rare disease space has to be true to its own healthcare and research goals and needs. But to the extent that everyone writes their own platform and rolls their own code, makes their own choices, things get worse. So whenever possible, use the same tools as other people. Use the same questions when you're measuring sleep and when you're measuring diet so that you can compare across when it's possible. And the other is, to go back to the very beginning of my talk, I started with political mobilization for a reason. You're in DC, right? The people who work for the large genetic counseling companies have spent weeks here this summer in their advocacy work around genetic regulation. Weeks, right? To the legislator, you are one community. You may be from different diseases, but to the legislator, it's like the journalist. They're too busy to be detailed, right? You should be, thinking of something at the level of ACT UP in the 80s. That's what's going to create change, because that's going to fund the network. It's going to fund the ability to do the outreach. Yeah. It's going to create regulations that require the outreach, right? All of that stuff comes from federal money. And right, a small group of deeply activated and committed and unified constituents on the Hill can get a lot done. And one of the only things in this town that still works is health funding and research funding. So I would say, start thinking about how you can put people under the same kind of pressure that the FDA was under in the 80s around HIV.
Thank you so much. And I guess we're time for the break, okay?
We are now up against our first 15-minute break. First of all, I want to thank John and Meg for a pretty amazing kickoff to the day and just awesome wisdom and great insight. So thank you very much. Happy birthday, Meg, again. And also, I know there are still a lot of questions that were asked that we didn't get to. We're going to see if we can hold on to these two for a little bit for some kind of off-camera follow-ups and see how we will document from there. I promise you we are definitely going to get to the questions, and we'll do some follow-up after today as well. And yes, the slides will be available for download. We had a little bit of formatting issues, so there was no irony there. There was a great user experience to Meg's slides, and probably some technology transfer between operating systems jacked it up. So we'll take care of that, and you'll have a great resource available online.